On a brisk
You
afternoon
have
in May
committed a serious
2024,
offense.
the atmosphere inside the Cook County Juvenile Court was thick with tension and unease. The courtroom buzzed quietly with murmurs from reporters, family members, and legal observers, all eyes fixed on a teenager who seemed defiantly detached from the gravity of the moment. 16-year-old Lucas Hayes sat in the defendant's chair, his dark eyes flashing with a mixture of rebellion and indifference, as a courtroom camera briefly scanned the room. In a sudden, stark gesture, Lucas raised his middle finger toward the lens, flipping off the camera with unapologetic bravado. The moment was brief but electrifying, instantly captured by media outlets and shared widely across social media platforms. It was a defining snapshot of a young man caught in the eye of a storm. A high-profile murder case that had gripped suburban Chicago and stirred national attention. Lucas's gesture, raw and unfiltered, seemed to embody the clash between youthful defiance and the unforgiving scrutiny of the justice system. It was a gesture that many would interpret as a cry of frustration, others as contempt. But all agreed it marked a turning point in the public perception of the case. Before we dive into this gripping tale of tragedy and defiance, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button so you never miss a story. And tell me, what are your thoughts on how our justice system handles young offenders? The courtroom itself was a reflection of the weight of the events that had unfolded. The walls, painted a muted beige, bore the official seals of the county and the state of Illinois, while rows of wooden benches were filled with family members, journalists, and curious onlookers. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and stale coffee, a reminder of the long hours and heavy burdens carried by everyone present. Lucas sat with his hands loosely clasped, his body language casual but guarded, revealing little of the storm raging beneath his calm exterior. This hearing was part of the ongoing pre-sentencing process in the murder case that had shocked the community. Just weeks earlier, Lucas had been arrested and charged with the stabbing death of his classmate, Daniel Foster, a tragedy that shattered the sense of safety in their suburban Chicago neighborhood. The tight-knit community, known for its tree-lined streets and family gatherings, struggled to comprehend how such violence could erupt among teenagers who had grown up just blocks apart. Lucas's actions in court that day, especially his brazen gesture to the camera, sent ripples through the courtroom and beyond. For some, it was a display of youthful recklessness, a momentary lapse in judgment born from frustration and fear. For others, it was a symbol of disrespect and defiance toward the court and the victims affected by the crime. Regardless of interpretation, the gesture became a focal point for media coverage, fueling debates about the attitudes of young offenders and their understanding of the consequences they face. The story leading to this tense courtroom moment was complex and fraught with emotional undercurrents. Daniel Foster, the victim, was a well-liked 17-year-old known for his involvement in community service and his promising future as a student. His death sent shockwaves through the community, leaving friends, family, and neighbors grappling with grief and disbelief. Memorials were held in his honor, and local schools organized counseling sessions to support students affected by the loss. On the other side was Lucas Hayes, a teenager with a troubled background that had come under intense scrutiny. His family life was marked by instability, with reports of frequent arguments and a lack of consistent parental guidance. At school, Lucas had exhibited behavioral issues, including frequent disciplinary actions and struggles with authority figures. Teachers and counselors noted his volatile temper and difficulty managing emotions, painting a picture of a young person on the edge, battling internal demons even before the fatal night. The courtroom drama unfolded as a microcosm of these larger issues. Lucas's defense team was acutely aware of the challenges he faced, both legally and personally. They cautioned against interpreting his courtroom demeanor as mere disrespect, instead suggesting it stemmed from immaturity and a lack of understanding about the full impact of his actions. Prosecutors, by contrast, highlighted the seriousness of the crime and the need for accountability, emphasizing the loss suffered by Daniel's family and the community. During the hearing, the judge maintained a firm but measured tone, reminding everyone present of the solemnity of the proceedings. The judge acknowledged Lucas's age and the complexities involved in juvenile justice, but underscored that the law required consequences for violent acts. The courtroom camera, initially intended to provide transparency in the legal process, instead captured the moment of Lucas's defiant gesture. A flashpoint that would be replayed and dissected in newsrooms and social media feeds for days to come. Outside the courtroom, the community's response was immediate and varied. Some residents expressed outrage at Lucas's apparent lack of remorse, seeing his gesture as an affront to the memory of Daniel and the grieving family. Others, particularly youth advocates and mental health professionals, cautioned against quick judgments, urging a deeper examination of the factors that lead young people into such tragic circumstances. The incident sparked conversations about the broader issues of adolescent development, the role of the justice system, and how society responds to juvenile offenders. The media coverage intensified, with local news stations running segments that juxtaposed images of the vibrant, smiling Daniel Foster with those of Lucas Hayes's courtroom defiance. Opinion pieces debated the appropriateness of broadcasting such moments, questioning whether they served justice or merely sensationalized a tragic event. Social media platforms became arenas of fierce debate, with hashtags supporting both the victim's family and calls for understanding and rehabilitation for Lucas trending nationwide. Behind the scenes, investigators and legal teams continued their work, preparing for the next phases of the case. The pre-sentencing hearing was just one step in a long journey that would examine the evidence, explore motives, and ultimately determine Lucas's fate. Psychological evaluations were underway, aiming to shed light on his mental state and capacity for rehabilitation. Meanwhile, community leaders sought ways to heal the wounds left by the tragedy, organizing forums and support groups to foster dialogue and prevent future violence. Lucas himself remained an enigma to many. His outward defiance masked the pressures and fears that undoubtedly weighed on him. Friends described him as both troubled and misunderstood, a teenager caught in circumstances beyond his control, yet responsible for actions that could not be ignored. His family, largely silent in public, grappled privately with the fallout, torn between loyalty and the harsh realities of the case. As the courtroom session concluded, the image of Lucas's raised middle finger lingered in the minds of those present and watching from afar. It was a stark reminder that beneath the headlines and legal jargon were real people, young lives shaped by complex forces, facing moments of reckoning that would define their futures. The gesture was not just an act of rebellion, but a symbol of the turbulent intersection between youth, crime, and the search for justice in a world that often struggles to understand both. The day's events set the tone for what would become a protracted and emotionally charged legal battle. Each subsequent hearing would peel back layers of the story, revealing the intricate web of relationships, motivations, and consequences that led to that fatal night. But for now, the courtroom remained still, the echoes of Lucas's defiance hanging in the air. A vivid snapshot of a moment when a teenager's rebellion collided head-on with the unyielding gaze of the law. Late into the evening of March 15, 2024, the quiet suburban streets of a Chicago neighborhood were shattered by the grim discovery of a young man's lifeless body. Daniel Foster, a 17-year-old high school junior, was found stabbed multiple times in a small park adjacent to his school. The area, usually a place of laughter and youthful energy during daylight hours, had become a crime scene bathed in flashing red and blue lights, yellow police tape, and the murmurs of stunned neighbors. The discovery was made just after 10 p.m. by a passing jogger who immediately called 911. When paramedics arrived, Daniel was already beyond help, his body cold and still beneath the shadowed canopy of trees. The park, once a sanctuary for local teens, was cordoned off as detectives began their painstaking investigation into what quickly became a case that gripped the tight-knit community. Police officers canvassed the neighborhood, speaking to residents and students alike, searching for any clue that could explain the senseless violence. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses became a critical focus. Within hours, investigators identified a figure captured on camera walking briskly near the park around the estimated time of the attack. That figure was Lucas Hayes, a name that would soon dominate headlines. The arrest came swiftly. Less than 24 hours after the discovery of Daniel's body, Lucas was taken into custody at his family home. Officers described the scene as tense, with Lucas showing little resistance but an unmistakable air of detachment. The charged atmosphere surrounding the arrest was palpable, with neighbors gathering and whispering anxiously, trying to reconcile the image of the boy they thought they knew with the accusations now leveled against him. Forensic teams worked meticulously at the scene and beyond, collecting evidence that would form the backbone of the prosecution's case. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife believed to have been taken from Lucas's home, was recovered nearby, smeared with blood that matched Daniel's DNA. Fingerprints found on the handle were identified as Lucas's, further tying him directly to the crime. Inside Lucas's clothing, traces of his own blood were detected, suggesting a violent struggle had taken place. Investigators also found compelling electronic evidence. Cell phone records placed Lucas near the park at the crucial time window between 9:30 and 10:15 p.m., contradicting his initial statements about his whereabouts that evening. Text messages retrieved from his phone revealed a series of tense exchanges between Lucas and Daniel in the days leading up to the murder, hinting at a deteriorating relationship marked by conflict and resentment. The details of that night slowly emerged under the scrutiny of the police investigation. According to witness statements, an argument had erupted between Lucas and Daniel earlier in the week, fueled by long-standing tensions at school. The nature of their dispute remained murky, but it was clear that emotions had escalated beyond typical teenage disagreements. On the night of the murder, surveillance footage showed Lucas lingering near the park after dark, his movements erratic and agitated. Detective Karen Mitchell, the lead investigator on the case, described the scene as one of tragic escalation. This wasn't a random act of violence, she explained in a press briefing. The evidence points to a confrontation that spiraled out of control, resulting in the death of a young man whose life was full of promise. Mitchell emphasized the painstaking nature of the investigation, which involved piecing together physical evidence, digital, footprints, and witness testimonies to build a comprehensive narrative. The arrest and the mounting evidence sent shockwaves through Daniel's family. His mother, Sarah Foster, was devastated, her grief compounded by the public nature of the case and the media attention that followed. Family friends described Daniel as a compassionate and ambitious teenager, deeply involved in his community and well-liked by peers. Memorial services drew hundreds, with classmates sharing stories of his kindness and dreams for the future. Lucas's family faced their own turmoil amid the unfolding tragedy. His parents, John and Melissa Hayes, issued a brief statement expressing shock and sorrow, but refrained from commenting on the specifics of the allegations. Friends and neighbors painted a picture of a boy who had struggled with emotional challenges and disciplinary issues, but was not seen as violent or dangerous. The stark contrast between public perception and the facts presented by the investigation added layers of complexity to the case. As the legal process moved forward, the evidence collected became a critical element in framing the narrative. Prosecutors were confident that the physical and digital proof would establish Lucas's presence at the scene and his involvement in the fatal attack. The fingerprints on the knife, the blood evidence, and the timeline constructed from phone data formed a compelling case that would challenge any defense strategy. The defense team, meanwhile, was tasked with navigating the difficult terrain of a case laden with damning forensic material. They sought to contextualize Lucas's behavior, exploring possibilities of self-defense or accidental harm during a confrontation gone wrong. However, early attempts to challenge the prosecution's timeline and evidence were met with skepticism by investigators and legal experts. In the days following the arrest, the community grappled with a mix of outrage, sadness, and disbelief. Schools implemented increased counseling services and security measures, aiming to support students while addressing fears stirred by the violence. Local leaders called for calm and unity, urging residents to come together in the face of tragedy. The police continued their efforts to solidify the case, conducting additional interviews and reviewing more footage. New leads were pursued, though none contradicted the core evidence pointing to Lucas. The narrative that emerged was one of a young man caught in a moment of intense conflict, resulting in irreversible consequences. Lucas's demeanor during questioning was described by law enforcement as guarded, but not overtly cooperative. His initial statements were inconsistent, with discrepancies about his movements and intentions that further complicated the investigation. These contradictions were scrutinized in subsequent interrogations, with investigators seeking clarity on the motives and circumstances surrounding the fatal encounter. The timing of the attack, the choice of location, and the nature of the wounds inflicted on Daniel suggested a level of anger and desperation. The coroner's report detailed multiple stab wounds, some defensive in nature, indicating a struggle that had escalated quickly and violently. The forensic analysis painted a grim portrait of a young life ended in a moment of chaos. As the case progressed toward formal charges, the weight of the evidence left little doubt in the minds of prosecutors. The combination of physical proof and digital records formed a cohesive story that would be presented in court, setting the stage for the legal battle ahead. Lucas's arrest was not merely a procedural step, but a pivotal moment that crystallized the community's collective shock and sorrow into a tangible pursuit of justice. Throughout this period, media coverage intensified, with reporters following every development and dissecting the implications of the evidence. Public opinion was divided, with some advocating for harsh penalties and others calling for a deeper understanding of the underlying issues that had led to the tragedy. The case became a focal point for discussions on youth violence, mental health, and the challenges faced by the juvenile justice system. Behind the headlines, the families of both Lucas and Daniel navigated their own personal journeys of grief and uncertainty. The Foster family mourned the loss of a beloved son and friend, while the Hayes family confronted the reality of their child's involvement in a devastating crime. Both were thrust into the unforgiving spotlight of a legal process that demanded answers and accountability. As investigators prepared to hand over their findings to prosecutors, the community braced for the next chapter in a story that had already upended lives and challenged assumptions. The evidence was clear, the questions profound, and the path forward uncertain. What had begun as a cherished neighborhood was now forever marked by a night of violence that would echo for years to come. The murder of Daniel Foster sent shockwaves through the quiet Chicago suburb, a community that prided itself on safety and close-knit relationships. As the investigation unfolded and Lucas Hayes was charged with the stabbing, neighbors friends, and family struggled to reconcile the violent act with the faces they had known for years. The tragedy challenged the very fabric of their neighborhood, exposing hidden fractures beneath the veneer of normalcy. Daniel's family was plunged into deep grief. His mother, Sarah Foster, described her son as a bright, compassionate teenager with an unyielding commitment to helping others. Daniel had been active in volunteer programs, tutoring younger students and participating in local food drives. Teachers remembered him as a diligent student with a warm smile, someone who had plans for college and dreams that now lay shattered. The family's home became a gathering place for mourners, with photographs, candles, and heartfelt messages filling the rooms as friends and neighbors sought to provide comfort in the wake of devastating loss. The community's reaction was immediate and visceral. Vigils were held in the park where Daniel's body was found, with hundreds of residents coming together to honor his memory. School administrators organized counseling services and assemblies aimed at processing grief and addressing fears of safety among students. Local leaders spoke publicly, urging calm and unity. But the emotional undercurrent of confusion and sorrow was palpable. In stark contrast to Daniel's story, Lucas Hayes' background revealed a more troubled narrative. His family life had long been marked by instability and challenges. John and Melissa Hayes, his parents, were often at odds, their relationship strained by financial difficulties and personal conflicts. Friends recalled hearing raised voices and witnessing moments of tension during visits to the Hayes household. The instability at home seemed to manifest in Lucas's behavior at school, where teachers and counselors noted frequent disciplinary issues and a pattern of defiance. School records painted a portrait of a student struggling to find his place. Lucas had been suspended multiple times for fighting and insubordination, drawing concern from educators who attempted to intervene. His academic performance was uneven, and he often appeared disengaged during class. Counselors who worked with him described a young man wrestling with anger and feelings of isolation, but also someone who showed flashes of insight and potential beneath the surface turmoil. The strained relationship between Lucas and his parents extended into the courtroom. During pre-trial hearings, family members spoke of their difficulties in communicating with him, highlighting a generation gap compounded by the pressures of adolescence and trauma. The Hayes household, once a place of refuge, had become a crucible for conflict, leaving Lucas isolated and vulnerable. Neighbors offered mixed accounts of Lucas's demeanor. Some remembered a quiet, brooding teenager who kept to himself, while others described occasional outbursts and confrontations that hinted at deeper issues. Despite these warning signs, few had anticipated the violent act that would forever change their community. The contrast between the two families was stark and heartbreaking. Where Daniel's life had been marked by hope and community engagement, Lucas's path was shadowed by instability and struggle. Yet, both were teenagers caught in a tragic collision course, their lives intertwined in a way that defied easy explanations. As the legal proceedings advanced, the community found itself grappling with complex questions about youth, violence, and responsibility. The sense of shock was accompanied by a growing awareness of the challenges faced by teenagers navigating difficult home environments and emotional turmoil. Local schools and organizations began to examine their roles in identifying at-risk youth and providing support, recognizing that prevention required more than just disciplinary measures. The families of both boys faced intense scrutiny and public attention. The Fosters sought solace in their faith and the support of friends, while the Hayes contended with the stigma and pain of having a child accused of a heinous crime. The divide between sympathy and condemnation was felt keenly on both sides, illustrating the polarizing nature of the case. Counselors and mental health professionals became involved, working with the families and the broader community to address underlying issues. Workshops on conflict resolution and emotional regulation were introduced in schools, aiming to equip students with tools to manage difficult situations. These efforts, though small, represented a collective attempt to heal and prevent future tragedies. Lucas's own struggles were further illuminated during court-appointed psychological evaluations. Experts noted his difficulty managing anger, impulsivity, and feelings of abandonment. These assessments became a critical component of his defense, suggesting that his actions were influenced by factors beyond simple malice. Yet, the evidence of premeditation and the brutal nature of the attack complicated narratives of diminished responsibility. The public discourse surrounding the case reflected broader societal concerns. Debates emerged about the adequacy of mental health resources for youth, the impact of family dysfunction, and the role of schools in fostering safe environments. The tragedy became a catalyst for conversations about how communities could better support vulnerable teenagers before conflicts escalated to violence. Despite the pain and division, moments of compassion and understanding also surfaced. Some community members reached out to the Hayes family, recognizing the need for empathy even amidst anger. Others organized support groups for families affected by juvenile crime, seeking to break cycles of isolation and stigma. Media coverage highlighted the disparities between Daniel's and Lucas's lives, framing the story as one of lost potential and the consequences of unmet needs. Interviews with educators, psychologists, and social workers painted a nuanced picture of the challenges facing young people in suburban America, where appearances often mask deep struggles. As the investigation and legal process continued, the community remained caught between grief for Daniel and concern for Lucas's future. The case became emblematic of the complexities surrounding youth crime, where victims and perpetrators are often products of intertwined circumstances that defy simple judgment. In the classrooms and homes of the suburb, the murder forced a reckoning. Parents questioned how well they knew their children, and neighbors wondered what signs might have been missed. Schools revisited policies and support systems, determined to learn from the tragedy even as they mourned. For the families involved, life was irrevocably changed. The Fosters faced the unbearable void left by Daniel's absence, while the Hayes confronted the daunting reality of their son's path through the justice system. Their stories, though divergent, were forever linked by a night that shattered lives and challenged a community's sense of safety and trust. Through the sorrow and turmoil, the suburbs struggled to find a way forward. Efforts to heal were tentative but persistent, reflecting a shared desire to honor Daniel's memory and prevent further loss. The story of Lucas and Daniel became a somber reminder of the fragile boundaries between childhood, conflict, and consequence. A narrative still unfolding in the hearts and minds of all who lived through it. Early court hearings in the spring of 2024 revealed a young defendant whose demeanor sharply contrasted with the somber weight of the charges he faced. Lucas Hayes, the 16-year-old accused of the stabbing death of his classmate Daniel Foster, appeared in courtroom after courtroom displaying a rebellious attitude that unsettled judges, attorneys, and observers alike. His behavior became a defining feature of the pre-trial process, adding layers of complexity to an already emotionally charged case. From the outset, Lucas's interactions with the judiciary were marked by moments of sarcasm and defiance. During a preliminary hearing, when asked a straightforward question about his whereabouts on the night of the murder, Lucas offered a dismissive smirk rather than a clear response. His body language, slouched posture, crossed arms, and rolling eyes, suggested a young man either overwhelmed by the gravity of the situation or deliberately challenging the authority of the court. Defense attorneys expressed concern that Lucas's immaturity and rebellious streak might undermine his legal defense. His attorney, Michelle Carter, privately confided to colleagues that Lucas's attitude risked sabotaging their efforts to present a coherent case. "He's smart, but he's acting like a kid who doesn't realize what's at stake," she told a reporter off the record. Carter's strategy involved trying to channel Lucas's energy into more constructive cooperation. But the teenager's resistance often made progress difficult. Prosecutors, on the other hand, viewed Lucas's behavior as indicative of a lack of remorse and an unwillingness to accept responsibility. Lead prosecutor Daniel Reyes noted in court filings that Lucas's disrespect toward court officials and witnesses could influence sentencing and public perception. His actions demonstrate a disregard for the legal process and the victim's family, Reyes argued during a motion hearing. The prosecution sought to use Lucas's courtroom demeanor as part of a broader narrative about accountability. One of the most striking incidents occurred during a routine camera check, a standard procedure to ensure courtroom security and transparency. As a camera panned across Lucas's seat, he suddenly raised his middle finger in a deliberate gesture of defiance. The action, caught live on camera, spread rapidly across news outlets and social media, igniting a firestorm of public opinion. The gesture was seen by many as a blatant insult to the court and the memory of Daniel Foster, further polarizing community sentiment. Judges responded sternly to Lucas's conduct, issuing warnings about courtroom decorum and the consequences of continued disrespect. During one hearing, presiding Judge Harold Briggs admonished Lucas directly, stating, "This court expects respect from all parties. Your behavior is not only immature, but undermines the seriousness of these proceedings." Despite these reprimands, Lucas's defiance persisted, leaving court officials frustrated and concerned. The media seized upon these courtroom moments, painting a picture of a troubled youth resistant to authority. Headlines framed Lucas as a defiant teenager unwilling to face the consequences of his actions, fueling public debate about juvenile crime and the limits of leniency. Some commentators argued that his behavior reflected deeper emotional turmoil, while others saw it as evidence of a dangerous lack of respect for societal norms. Within the courtroom, the tension between Lucas's rebelliousness and the seriousness of the case created a charged atmosphere. Witnesses, including teachers and classmates, reported feeling unsettled by his demeanor during testimony. Some described moments when Lucas smirked or whispered to his attorney during emotional statements, further straining the patience of those present. Lucas's defense team faced the delicate task of balancing his need for self-expression with the legal necessity of presenting a credible case. Michelle Carter sought to contextualize his behavior as the reaction of a scared, confused teenager, rather than a calculated act of contempt. She argued that his defiance was a coping mechanism in the face of overwhelming pressure and trauma. However, this narrative struggled against the stark reality of the evidence and the public's demand for accountability. In private meetings, Carter worked to build rapport with Lucas, encouraging him to engage more seriously with the legal process. She emphasized the importance of demonstrating respect and remorse, explaining how such attitudes could influence sentencing outcomes. Lucas's responses were uneven. At times, he appeared receptive, while at others, he retreated into silence or displayed renewed defiance. This push and pull between lawyer and client highlighted the broader challenges of representing juvenile defendants accused of serious crimes. Legal experts noted that adolescence is often marked by impulsivity and a limited appreciation of long-term consequences, complicating efforts to navigate the courtroom environment. The case underscored the tension between viewing young offenders as individuals capable of rehabilitation and holding them accountable for violent acts. The courtroom episodes also provided insight into Lucas's psychological state. Observers noted signs of emotional volatility, including moments of anger and frustration that erupted unpredictably. Psychologists involved in the case suggested that his behavior reflected underlying struggles with impulse control and emotional regulation. These assessments would later play a role in shaping arguments about his capacity and intent. At the same time, the prosecution remained focused on the severity of the crime and the impact on Daniel Foster's family and the community. Prosecutor Reyes highlighted Lucas's behavior as part of a pattern of disregard for others, framing the murder as a consequence of unchecked aggression and defiance. The state sought to ensure that the courtroom dynamic did not diminish the gravity of the offense or the need for justice. The courtroom became a stage where the clash between youth and authority was starkly on display. Lucas's rebellious acts, including the infamous middle finger incident, symbolized a broader struggle over control, accountability, and understanding. For many, these moments underscored the difficulties of addressing serious juvenile crime within a system designed to balance punishment and rehabilitation. Outside the courtroom, reactions varied widely. Some community members expressed outrage, interpreting Lucas's conduct as further evidence of a lack of remorse. Others, particularly youth advocates and mental health professionals, cautioning against judging a teenager so harshly, pointed to the complexities of adolescent development and trauma. The gesture caught on camera became a lightning rod for these competing perspectives. As pretrial hearings continued, Lucas's courtroom demeanor remained a focal point. Judges weighed his behavior alongside the mounting evidence, considering how it might influence decisions about bail, trial procedures, and eventual sentencing. Legal analysts speculated that his defiance could be detrimental to his case, potentially alienating jurors and hardening judicial attitudes. Despite these challenges, Lucas's defense team persisted in their efforts to present a nuanced picture. They sought to humanize him, highlighting his struggles and potential for growth. Psychological evaluations were introduced to provide context, and character witnesses prepared to testify about his positive attributes and moments of kindness. The defense aimed to balance acknowledgement of the crime's seriousness with a call for compassion and understanding. The courtroom episodes also revealed the emotional toll of the case on Lucas himself. Reports from court staff described moments when his bravado gave way to visible distress, a reminder of the internal conflict beneath the defiant exterior. These glimpses of vulnerability added complexity to the public narrative and underscored the challenges faced by all involved in the proceedings. As the hearings progressed, the dynamic between Lucas and the court remained fraught, emblematic of broader societal debates about juvenile justice. The tension between holding young offenders accountable and recognizing their developmental limitations played out not just in legal arguments, but in every gesture, glance, and exchange within the courtroom walls. Lucas's flipping off the courtroom camera during that pivotal pre-sentencing hearing became a symbol of this tension, a moment capturing the raw collision of adolescent rebellion with the unforgiving machinery of the justice system. It was a defining act that would resonate throughout the case, shaping perceptions and influencing the course of a story that was far from over. As the trial approached, prosecutors meticulously laid out a timeline that sought to piece together the events leading to Daniel Foster's tragic death, relying heavily on a convergence of phone records, eyewitness testimonies, and irrefutable DNA evidence that linked Lucas Hayes directly to the crime scene. This compelling array of material painted a stark narrative, one that prosecutors believed would not only establish Lucas's presence near the park that fateful night, but also demonstrate his active role in the fatal stabbing. Central to the prosecution's case were cell phone records that traced Lucas's movements with chilling precision. Data extracted from his phone placed him within mere blocks of the park during the critical time window between 9:30 and 10:15 p.m., starkly contradicting his initial accounts of where he had been. Investigators highlighted these records during pretrial hearings, emphasizing the digital footprints that bore witness to his proximity to the scene. The precision of these data points left little room for doubt, reinforcing the prosecution's narrative that Lucas was not a mere bystander, but an active participant. Eyewitness accounts further solidified the timeline. Several residents and students recalled seeing Lucas near the park in the late evening hours, his demeanor described as agitated and restless. One neighbor, who wished to remain anonymous, recounted spotting a figure matching Lucas's description pacing near the park entrance shortly before the estimated time of the attack. Others noted heated exchanges between Lucas and Daniel in the days leading up to the incident, suggesting escalating tensions that culminated in violence. The forensic evidence proved equally damning. DNA analysis confirmed that the knife recovered near the crime scene bore Lucas's fingerprints, while blood samples matched Daniel's and, intriguingly, fragments of Lucas's own blood were found on his clothing, indicators of a struggle that ended in tragedy. The prosecution underscored these elements during court sessions, presenting detailed photographs and expert testimony to illustrate the physical confrontation that had taken place. Despite the weight of this evidence, Lucas's defense team crafted a counter-narrative centered on self-defense, arguing that the fatal encounter was not premeditated, but rather a spontaneous response to a threatening situation. They pointed to prior altercations between Lucas and Daniel, asserting that their client acted out of fear during a confrontation that escalated beyond control. Defense attorneys highlighted Lucas's troubled background and emotional struggles, seeking to humanize him and contextualize the violence as a tragic misstep rather than cold-blooded murder. However, the defense's argument faced significant challenges, particularly as contradictions emerged in Lucas's own statements. During multiple interrogations, inconsistencies about his whereabouts and actions sowed doubt about the reliability of his account. Prosecutors seized on these discrepancies, portraying them as attempts to evade responsibility and obfuscate the truth. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses added another layer of complexity. Cameras captured Lucas's movements around the park, showing him pacing and appearing agitated, behavior that prosecutors interpreted as indicative of premeditation rather than a panic-driven reaction. The footage contradicted Lucas's claims of being elsewhere or uninvolved, undermining key elements of the defense's story. The defense worked to challenge the prosecution's timeline and evidence, questioning the interpretation of the digital data and the credibility of eyewitnesses. They suggested that some witnesses may have been influenced by media coverage or community bias, casting doubt on the objectivity of their recollections. Additionally, forensic experts called by the defense scrutinized the DNA evidence, proposing alternative explanations for the presence of blood on Lucas's clothing. Despite these efforts, the prosecution maintained a cohesive and compelling narrative. Lead prosecutor Daniel Reyes emphasized the cumulative weight of the evidence, painting a picture of a confrontation fueled by jealousy and resentment that escalated into a fatal attack. This was not an accident, Reyes asserted during closing arguments and pretrial motions. It was the result of choices made in the heat of anger, with devastating consequences. The courtroom became a battleground for competing narratives, each side striving to sway the jury and shape public perception. The prosecution's meticulous presentation of evidence aimed to dismantle the self-defense claim, while the defense appealed to the jury's capacity for empathy and understanding of a troubled adolescent's struggle. Throughout the proceedings, the emotional toll on all involved was palpable. Daniel Foster's family sat stoically, absorbing the details of the attack and the events that led to their loss. Their grief was both raw and resolute, underscoring the human cost behind the legal arguments. Meanwhile, Lucas's defense team grappled with the challenge of defending a client whose own actions and statements complicated their case. The trial also brought to light broader issues surrounding juvenile justice and the complexities of adjudicating serious crimes committed by minors. Legal experts observed the tension between holding young offenders accountable and recognizing their developmental limitations. Lucas's age and psychological evaluations became focal points in discussions about intent, capacity, and appropriate sentencing. As the prosecution laid out its evidence, the defense prepared to call witnesses and experts who would delve into Lucas's background, mental health, and the circumstances that led to the violent confrontation. The upcoming testimonies promised to add nuance to a case that had already captivated the community and sparked widespread debate. Outside the courtroom, the community remained deeply engaged, with local media providing extensive coverage and residents voicing a range of opinions. Some advocated for a harsh sentence, emphasizing the need for justice and safety, while others called for rehabilitation and support for troubled youth. The case became a mirror reflecting societal anxieties about adolescent violence, accountability, and the path to redemption. The evidence presented thus far had set a clear trajectory for the trial, establishing Lucas Hayes' connection to the crime scene and challenging his initial narrative. Yet, the unfolding legal drama was far from over. With the defense poised to offer their perspective, and the jury tasked with navigating a complex web of facts, emotions, and moral questions. In the days leading up to the start of the full trial, both sides intensified their preparations. Prosecutors refined their timeline, ensuring each piece of evidence would be linked seamlessly to the next. Defense attorneys worked closely with psychological experts, aiming to introduce testimony that might mitigate culpability and contextualize Lucas's actions. As opening statements loomed, the courtroom stood on the precipice of a trial that would test the limits of justice, compassion, and the community's resolve. The narrative, constructed from phone records, eyewitness accounts, and forensic evidence, promised to be a defining element in a story that had already altered countless lives. As the trial preparations intensified, court-ordered psychological evaluations of Lucas Hayes became a pivotal element in understanding the young defendant's state of mind and the factors that may have influenced his actions. Expert assessments revealed a complex portrait of a teenager grappling with anger management issues and significant impulse control difficulties, shedding light on the emotional turmoil that underpinned the fatal night. Dr. Emily Hartman, a clinical psychologist specializing in adolescent behavior, conducted extensive evaluations over several sessions. Her reports detailed Lucas's struggles with regulating intense emotions and his tendency toward reactive aggression when faced with perceived threats or provocations. These findings provided crucial context, suggesting that Lucas's actions were not merely the product of cold calculation, but were deeply intertwined with his psychological challenges. The evaluations also highlighted a history of behavioral problems dating back several years. School counselors and previous mental health assessments documented episodes of defiance, mood swings, and difficulty maintaining relationships with peers and authority figures. Dr. Hartman noted that Lucas exhibited signs consistent with intermittent explosive disorder, a condition characterized by sudden episodes of unwarranted anger and violence. This diagnosis underscored the potential for impulsive behavior without premeditation. In addition to clinical interviews and standardized testing, the psychological assessment incorporated detailed reviews of Lucas's social media exchanges. Investigators had uncovered a series of escalating conflicts between Lucas and Daniel Foster in the weeks leading up to the murder, documented in text messages and online posts. These communications revealed a pattern of bullying, name-calling, and veiled threats, painting a picture of a toxic relationship fraught with jealousy and resentment. One particularly troubling exchange showed Lucas expressing frustration and fear about Daniel's growing influence among their peers, suggesting feelings of insecurity and social isolation. Conversely, Daniel's messages hinted at a dismissive attitude toward Lucas, intensifying the emotional stakes for both teenagers. These digital interactions became a focal point in understanding the motive behind the violent confrontation. Court-appointed experts also assessed Lucas's cognitive development and emotional maturity. While he demonstrated average intelligence and the capacity for reasoning, his emotional regulation lagged behind that of his peers. This disparity was consistent with adolescent brain development patterns, where the limbic system, the center of emotion, often outpaces the prefrontal cortex, responsible for impulse control and judgment. The defense leveraged these findings to argue for diminished capacity, framing Lucas as a youth overwhelmed by emotions rather than a cold-blooded killer. Attorney Michelle Carter presented Dr. Hartman's testimony as evidence that Lucas's impulse control issues and psychological vulnerabilities significantly impaired his ability to make rational decisions during the confrontation with Daniel. However, the prosecution challenged this interpretation, contending that while Lucas may have struggled emotionally, the evidence pointed to a deliberate act fueled by escalating conflicts. Prosecutor Daniel Reyes emphasized that the psychological evaluations did not excuse the violence, but should be considered alongside the physical evidence and Lucas's behavior before and after the attack. The court wrestled with the complex interplay between psychological factors and legal responsibility. Judges and jurors were tasked with determining how much weight to assign to Lucas's mental health issues in assessing intent and culpability. The tension between compassion and accountability permeated courtroom discussions and legal arguments. Beyond the clinical findings, the case ignited broader conversations about bullying and social media's role in escalating conflicts among teenagers. Educators and community leaders highlighted the pervasive impact of online harassment, noting how digital platforms can amplify tensions and contribute to emotional distress. The Lucas and Daniel case became a somber example of how virtual interactions can have devastating real-world consequences. School counselors testified about the challenges of monitoring and addressing bullying in an era where much of the conflict unfolds online and often outside school hours. They acknowledged limitations in their ability to intervene effectively, underscoring the need for comprehensive strategies that involve parents, schools, and mental health professionals. The psychological dimension of the case also brought attention to the importance of early intervention for youth exhibiting behavioral problems. Experts advocated for increased access to mental health resources, anger management programs, and conflict resolution training to prevent similar tragedies. The community began to explore ways to strengthen support systems for at-risk adolescents. Within the courtroom, Lucas's emotional state was a subject of intense scrutiny. Witnesses described moments when he appeared withdrawn and overwhelmed, contrasting sharply with earlier displays of defiance. These fluctuations highlighted the inner turmoil he faced, caught between fear, guilt, and confusion. The defense argued that recognizing Lucas's psychological struggles was essential not only for fair adjudication, but also for guiding rehabilitative efforts. They urged the court to consider sentencing options that included mental health treatment and counseling, emphasizing the potential for growth and change. Meanwhile, the prosecution maintained a focus on justice for Daniel Foster, asserting that while psychological factors were relevant, they did not diminish the severity of the crime. They cautioned against allowing mental health considerations to overshadow the loss endured by the victim's family and the community. As testimony unfolded, the courtroom became a venue where the complexities of adolescent psychology intersected with the demands of the legal system. The case highlighted the challenges of balancing empathy for a troubled youth with the need to uphold societal norms and protect victims. Outside the courtroom, the public grappled with these issues as well. Media coverage delved into the psychological findings, sparking debates about juvenile justice reform and the adequacy of mental health services in schools and communities. Advocacy groups called for increased funding and policy changes to address the root causes of youth violence. Parents and educators reflected on their roles in identifying warning signs and fostering environments where teenagers could express emotions safely and constructively. The tragedy of Daniel Foster's death became a catalyst for conversations about prevention and the importance of addressing emotional health early. In the midst of these discussions, Lucas remained at the center of a story that was as much about a young life in crisis as it was about a criminal act. The psychological evaluations offered a window into his struggles, complicating simplistic narratives and challenging the community to consider the multifaceted nature of juvenile crime. The case underscored the reality that behind every legal proceeding involving youth lay intricate human stories, stories of pain, conflict, and the potential for redemption. For the court, the families, and the community, these revelations added depth to an already charged and heartbreaking saga. The day of sentencing arrived in early June 2024, casting a heavy pall over the Cook County Juvenile Court. The courtroom was filled to capacity, with family members, community residents, reporters, and legal officials gathered to witness the moment when Lucas Hayes would face the consequences of his actions. Emotions ran high, underscoring the gravity of a case that had gripped the suburban Chicago community for months. As the judge prepared to deliver the sentence, all eyes were on Lucas, now 16 but burdened by the weight of a serious felony conviction. The atmosphere was tense, a mixture of anticipation, sorrow, and unresolved anger. The courtroom cameras captured every detail, broadcasting the moment live to a public captivated by the culmination of a tragic story. In an unexpected and jarring display, as the courtroom camera swung toward him during a routine check, Lucas raised his middle finger in a deliberate gesture of defiance. The act was swift but unmistakable, a raw expression of rebellion amid a moment steeped in solemnity. Reporters quickly seized on the image, which would flood social media and news outlets, igniting waves of controversy and debate. The judge, presiding over the sentencing hearing, paused briefly to acknowledge the gesture before addressing Lucas directly. "Mr. Hayes," Judge Harold Briggs said with measured sternness, "this court expects respect for the proceedings and the gravity of the situation. Your behavior today reflects poorly on your character and your understanding of the consequences you face." The rebuke was clear, but the courtroom's tension remained palpable. Lucas's act of defiance was interpreted in many ways. To some, it was a symbol of teenage rebellion, a momentary outburst from a young man overwhelmed by fear and anger. To others, particularly the victim's family and community members, it was a deeply hurtful insult, an affront to the memory of Daniel Foster and the suffering endured. The gesture crystallized the complex emotions swirling around the case, embodying the clash between youthful impulsivity and societal expectations of accountability. The judge then proceeded to deliver the sentence. After careful consideration of the evidence, psychological evaluations, and the arguments presented by both the prosecution and defense, Lucas was found guilty of second-degree murder. The jury had acknowledged mitigating factors related to his age and psychological state, but determined that his actions warranted serious consequences. Judge Briggs sentenced Lucas to 25 years in a juvenile detention facility, with the possibility of parole after serving a portion of the sentence. The ruling emphasized rehabilitation alongside punishment, reflecting the delicate balance the court sought to maintain in a case involving a minor. The judge spoke at length about the need for Lucas to understand the impact of his actions and to work toward personal growth during his incarceration. The sentencing hearing prompted intense reactions. Daniel Foster's family expressed a mixture of relief and sorrow. His mother, Sarah Foster, spoke briefly outside the courthouse, saying, "Justice has been served, but nothing can bring Daniel back. We hope this sentence brings some measure of peace and prevents others from suffering like we have." The family's grief was palpable, their loss a stark reminder of the human cost behind the legal proceedings. Community members gathered to discuss the implications of the sentence. Some praised the court for recognizing Lucas's age and psychological challenges while holding him accountable for a violent act. Others argued that the punishment was too lenient for the severity of the crime, calling for stricter measures to deter youth violence. The debate highlighted ongoing tensions about how society addresses serious offenses committed by minors. Legal experts weighed in on the case, noting that the sentence reflected evolving attitudes toward juvenile justice. The ruling underscored the recognition that adolescents possess a greater capacity for change than adults, and that rehabilitation should be a central goal. At the same time, the seriousness of the crime demanded accountability, creating a complex legal and moral landscape. Lucas's courtroom gesture became a focal point of national discussion. Social media platforms buzzed with commentary, some sympathizing with the frustrations of a teenager facing harsh realities, others condemning the disrespect shown in a solemn setting. The image sparked conversations about youth behavior, the consequences of public defiance, and the challenges of balancing justice with empathy. Within the courtroom, the moment served as a stark reminder of the challenges faced by the justice system when dealing with juvenile offenders. Lucas's defiance symbolized the struggle between punishment and understanding, reflecting broader societal debates about how to handle young people who commit serious crimes. As the hearing concluded, Lucas was led away to begin serving his sentence. The weight of the moment settled over the courtroom, a mixture of finality and uncertainty. For Lucas, the sentence marked the beginning of a long journey within the juvenile justice system, a path that would test his capacity for reflection and change. For the community, the case became a catalyst for introspection and dialogue. Schools and local organizations intensified efforts to address youth violence, mental health, and conflict resolution. Parents and educators grappled with questions about how to better support teenagers navigating difficult emotional landscapes. The sentencing hearing also prompted calls for policy discussions at the state level. Lawmakers and advocates debated the appropriateness of sentencing minors to long terms in detention facilities, considering the balance between public safety and the potential for rehabilitation. The case of Lucas Hayes became part of a broader conversation about juvenile justice reform. Meanwhile, Daniel Foster's memory continued to inspire community initiatives. Scholarships, memorial events, and support programs for at-risk youth were established in his name, reflecting a collective desire to channel grief into positive change. His legacy became intertwined with efforts to prevent future tragedies. Lucas's gesture during the hearing remained a potent symbol of the case's emotional complexity. It encapsulated the tension between youthful defiance and the demand for accountability, serving as a focal point for discussions about adolescence, justice, and the consequences of crime. As Lucas began serving his sentence, reports emerged of his fluctuating demeanor, moments of remorse and reflection, tempered by ongoing struggles with anger and identity. His journey through the juvenile justice system would be closely watched, emblematic of the challenges faced by young offenders seeking redemption. The sentencing day marked a pivotal chapter in a story that had profoundly affected a community. It underscored the painful realities of youth violence and the difficult choices faced by a legal system striving to balance justice, rehabilitation, and public safety. The echoes of that day would reverberate in the lives of all involved for years to come. After a grueling trial that had gripped the suburban Chicago community for months, The jury delivered its verdict on a humid afternoon in late June 2024. Lucas Hayes was found guilty of second-degree murder in the stabbing death of his classmate, Daniel Foster. The decision came after 14 hours of intense deliberation, during which jurors weighed the complex and often conflicting evidence presented by both the prosecution and defense. The jury's verdict reflected a nuanced understanding of the case. While they acknowledged mitigating circumstances related to Lucas's age and psychological evaluations, they ultimately determined that his actions went beyond impulsivity and warranted serious criminal responsibility. The finding of guilt on the lesser charge of second-degree murder signaled recognition that the killing was not fully premeditated, but was nonetheless a deliberate and reckless act. Judge Harold Briggs presided over the sentencing hearing that followed, emphasizing the gravity of the offense while also noting the importance of rehabilitation for juvenile offenders. After careful consideration of all factors, the judge sentenced Lucas to 25 years in a juvenile detention facility, with the possibility of parole after serving a substantial portion of his term. The sentence balanced punishment with the opportunity for future reintegration into society, acknowledging both the severity of the crime and the potential for growth in youth. The courtroom was somber as the sentence was read aloud. Family members of both the victim and the defendant sat quietly, the weight of months of legal proceedings settling upon them. Daniel Foster's mother, Sarah, maintained a composed demeanor, though tears welled in her eyes as she absorbed the outcome. Outside the courthouse, supporters gathered, some holding signs honoring Daniel's memory, others calling for justice and reform. The sentence sparked a wave of public debate across the community and beyond. Advocates for victims' rights praised the decision as a measure that upheld justice and acknowledged the profound loss suffered by the Foster family. This verdict sends a clear message that violent acts, regardless of the perpetrator's age, have consequences, said local advocate Maria Sanchez in a televised interview. Conversely, juvenile justice reform groups expressed concern about the length of the sentence, questioning whether such a harsh penalty for a minor aligned with developmental science and rehabilitative goals. Experts highlighted that adolescent brains are still developing, particularly in areas related to impulse control and decision-making, and argued for sentencing that prioritizes treatment and support over lengthy incarceration. The media coverage was extensive and often polarized. Some outlets focused on the community's need for safety and accountability, while others highlighted the complex psychological factors at play. Social media platforms became battlegrounds for discussion, with hashtags both condemning and defending Lucas trending nationwide. The case ignited conversations about the balance between justice and mercy in juvenile crime. Legal analysts noted that the jury's decision and the judge's sentence reflected evolving attitudes in the American justice system toward young offenders. The recognition of mitigating factors, such as mental health challenges and age signaled progress in incorporating scientific understanding into legal proceedings. Yet, the imposition of a lengthy sentence underscored the ongoing tension between rehabilitation and punishment. Lucas's defense team expressed disappointment with the verdict, but indicated plans to explore appeals and alternative sentencing options. Attorney Michelle Carter emphasized the importance of ongoing mental health treatment and educational opportunities within the juvenile system. While we respect the court's decision, we remain committed to supporting Lucas's rehabilitation and eventual reintegration, she stated in a press release. The prosecution viewed the outcome as a validation of their efforts to seek justice for Daniel Foster. Lead prosecutor Daniel Reyes remarked, "The jury's verdict reflects a careful consideration of the facts and the impact of this crime. Our priority was to ensure accountability while recognizing the unique circumstances of juvenile offenders. Within the community, The verdict prompted reflection on the broader issues surrounding youth violence and the challenges of addressing it effectively. Schools increased efforts to implement anti-bullying programs, conflict resolution training, and mental health resources. Local organizations collaborated to create support networks for at-risk youth, aiming to prevent future tragedies. The case also led to discussions about the role of social media in escalating conflicts. Educators and parents acknowledged the difficulties of monitoring online interactions and the need for digital literacy programs that teach responsible communication. The tragic outcome served as a cautionary tale about the potential consequences of unchecked hostility. For Daniel Foster's family, the verdict was a bittersweet milestone. While it provided a measure of closure, the absence of their son remained an unfillable void. Memorials and scholarships established in Daniel's name continued to honor his memory and commitment to community service, ensuring his legacy endured. Lucas Hayes began serving his sentence amid ongoing evaluations and counseling aimed at addressing his psychological needs and behavioral challenges. Reports from juvenile detention centers indicated that he exhibited a range of emotions, from remorse to frustration, as he adapted to the structured environment. His rehabilitation journey would be closely monitored, with opportunities for education and therapy designed to prepare him for eventual parole. The legal proceedings and their aftermath underscored the complexities inherent in juvenile justice cases involving serious crimes. Balancing public safety, accountability, and the developmental realities of adolescence proved a formidable task for courts, families, and communities alike. The Lucas Hayes case became a focal point for dialogue on how best to navigate these challenges. As years passed, the case continued to influence policies and practices related to juvenile crime in Illinois and beyond. Lawmakers considered reforms aimed at improving mental health support, enhancing restorative justice programs, and refining sentencing guidelines to better reflect scientific understanding of adolescent development. The story of Lucas Hayes and Daniel Foster remained a poignant reminder of the fragile intersection between youth, violence, and justice. It highlighted the enduring impact of a single night's tragedy on countless lives, and the ongoing struggle to find equitable solutions within a complex legal and social landscape. The conviction of Lucas Hayes ignited an intense and sustained conversation about youth violence, mental health, and the evolving role of technology in adolescent conflicts. The small Chicago suburb that had once been known for its quiet streets and close community ties found itself at the center of a national debate, grappling with the complex realities revealed by the tragic murder of Daniel Foster. In the weeks following the verdict, local schools reported a surge in discussions about bullying and emotional well-being. Counselors were overwhelmed with students seeking support, many expressing fears about peer conflicts escalating into violence. Educational institutions responded by implementing new programs focused on mental health awareness, conflict resolution, and digital citizenship, recognizing the critical role they played in shaping young lives. Parents, too, found themselves confronting uncomfortable questions about the challenges their children faced. Community meetings and workshops were organized to educate families on recognizing signs of distress, managing adolescent emotions, and fostering open communication. The case underscored how easily misunderstandings and unresolved tensions, amplified by social media, could spiral into tragedy. Mental health professionals from across the region joined the dialogue, advocating for increased resources and early intervention programs. They highlighted that many youths like Lucas struggle silently with anger, anxiety, and other emotional difficulties, often without adequate support. Their voices added urgency to calls for systemic change in how communities address the psychological needs of their young people. Social media platforms, implicated as accelerants in the conflict between Lucas and Daniel, came under scrutiny. Experts debated the responsibility of technology companies to monitor and mitigate online harassment and bullying. Educational campaigns aimed at promoting respectful digital interaction gained momentum, seeking to teach adolescents about the lasting impact of their online behavior. The media coverage of Lucas's defiant gesture during his sentencing hearing became emblematic of the broader cultural tensions surrounding youth, authority, and justice. For some, it symbolized the frustration and alienation felt by many teenagers navigating difficult circumstances. For others, it was a stark reminder of the need for accountability and respect within the judicial process. Policymakers in Illinois and beyond began to examine juvenile justice laws in light of the case. Debates focused on finding the delicate balance between protecting society and offering pathways to rehabilitation. Proposals included expanding mental health services within detention facilities, increasing access to restorative justice programs, and revising sentencing guidelines to better reflect adolescent development. The case also inspired new research initiatives exploring the intersection of adolescent brain development, behavior, and legal responsibility. Universities and think tanks launched studies aimed at informing evidence-based policies and practices. These efforts sought to bridge the gap between scientific understanding and legal frameworks, ultimately aiming to improve outcomes for youth involved in the justice system. Within the community, efforts to heal continued. Memorial scholarships and community service projects were established in Daniel Foster's name, honoring his legacy and commitment to helping others. These initiatives provided positive outlets for young people and fostered a sense of unity and purpose amid the lingering grief. Lucas Hayes's life behind bars unfolded with moments of reflection and struggle. Reports indicated that, over time, he began to engage more fully with counseling and educational programs, showing signs of remorse and a desire to understand the consequences of his actions. His journey became a testament to the potential for growth, even in the face of profound mistakes, though the path ahead remained uncertain. The families involved remained intertwined by tragedy. The Foster family continued to advocate for victims' rights and youth violence prevention, channeling their pain into activism and community support. The Hayes family grappled with the dual burden of loss and accountability, navigating their own complex grieving process. As years passed, the story of Lucas and Daniel endured as a cautionary tale and a catalyst for change. It highlighted the multifaceted challenges of addressing juvenile crime, the impact of family dynamics, and the powerful influence of technology on adolescent interactions. The case underscored the necessity of comprehensive approaches that combine justice, compassion, and proactive support. The community's experience sparked broader conversations across the nation about how society perceives and manages youth violence. It raised critical questions about the adequacy of current systems and the responsibility shared by families, schools, law enforcement, and policymakers. The dialogues generated by the case contributed to an evolving understanding of juvenile justice and prevention strategies. In classrooms, homes, and public forums, the legacy of the tragedy lived on. It served as a reminder of the fragile balance between childhood and adulthood, innocence and accountability, and the profound consequences that can arise when that balance is disrupted. The narrative of Lucas Hayes and Daniel Foster became a poignant chapter in the ongoing story of justice, redemption, and community resilience in America.